When we started Flox about 4 years ago, we weren't planning for AI when we were building it. It was just that Flox came in and said, hey, why can't this entire 4 first layers of software infrastructure be mushed into just one command? Fast forward to when AI starts picking up, that's where we did feel a big wave come in because Flox can sit on anything. It can sit in the cloud, it can sit in a container, but the local aspect was the most important because that meant that these engineers could actually touch and be aware of the system around them.
What is the value proposition or the sort of the problem to be solved that you're seeing people kind of use environments as code, specifically Flox, for agents?
The core concepts of Nix and Flox when we were building it still stay the same. The more progress we can make on making the output from humans or agents, or humans and agents, or whatever mix we have in between, to be more trusted, the more ROI we're going to get out of AI.
AI and agents, what they do is they supercharge patterns that we've already sort of seen in the real world. And as you supercharge it and you turn it from something that happens once a day to something that happens once a minute, any percentage deviation from accuracy over here starts multiplying and becoming usable. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the AI Native Dev. Excited that you joined us today. And we have a really, really interesting conversation ahead of us talking about sort of environments and how do you kind of have AI code generation maybe meet the real world, where things actually run. And to help us dig into this and more, we have Ron Efroni, who is the CEO and co-founder of Flox, as well as the president of the NixOS Foundation. Ron, thanks for coming onto the show.
Yeah, definitely. Super excited to be here, Guy.
So Ron, we're going to dig into, like why agents even need environments and where's this going and how can different tools around help with that. But just for context a little bit of your world today, can you explain a bit of what Flox is and maybe a little bit of what Nix is, because that's an important piece of its background.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll start off with Flox. Flox today is pretty much your universal cross-platform environment manager. With Flox, it's open source. You can create these environments that can go into production, development, building and testing, and these environments are consistent. So you define them once, they can run on any OS, any architecture, lots of inbound from very complex spaces like hardware, security, AI, and financials using the product today. And all of this is based on the amazing magic that is coming in from Nix. So Nix is today, I think, the 6th largest open source project in the world, over 10,000 active monthly contributors. And Nix is a lot of things. It's the largest package repository that's cross-language, over 150,000 packages, all the way to its own operating system. So you don't have to do OS replace, but Nix is a lot. It's a big community, and it's pretty great.
Yeah, and I think maybe it's fair to say that like Flox's roots were to sort of take the power of Nix, of sort of managing kind of granular environments and kind of make it usable, make it a bit more. You kind of have to get a bit of a PhD to get going with Nix sometimes on it. When you do, you can do wondrous things with it, while sort of Flox is more about, okay, how do we kind of bring this power to the broader audience?
Exactly. And the way I would think about it is that, again, Nix does so many things incredibly well. The 3 things that Flox cares about, and we really are trying to expose to engineers and more developers and democratize it. It's first of all, how Nix thinks about having a consistent architecture across any pretty much piece of software in history, right? If it's a dependency, a library, an environment, something that a agent is trying to pull or run, or an LLM, Nix says it's all the same thing. It's a Nix package. So that's the environment piece. That's the consistency in the stack piece. And then it starts going into the build area, creating a lot of ROI there, and how Nix thinks about the build and pretty much reproducibility and determinism of the build. And the last space that Nix really is shining in my mind is the software supply chain security side, but that's kind of on the right.
Right. In a lot of kind of tracking, I guess, of everything that has happened in the process of that.
Yes.
It's interesting to think a little bit as this is probably sound more belittling than I mean it, but is whether Nix is like the alt messages of the alt text of packages on it. Like a lot of it is like, it's descriptive of I need these things to exist, to run, but it allows you to then sort of operate with more specificity, but also in a way that thinks a little bit about when do things get upgraded or the likes. So I guess is Is Nix actually like a lower level than package management? It's actually like more control and more granular, or is it better to think about it as like an abstraction layer, as something that sort of goes above?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think so. So the way I would think about it is for folks that are listening are familiar with virtual environments. I think it's like a virtual environment slammed into a package manager all in one. So your question, I would say it's just a different way of thinking about package management.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily lower level. It's kind of more on that same level with what we're used to. Just it has a different way of defining it, because Nix has a concept that we internally in the community call purity. Kind of it's like an interesting word for a package manager, but it requires any piece of software, any piece of code that's derived into a Nix package to come self-contained with everything it depends on recursively all the way down almost to the kernel.
Mm-hmm.
So other package managers might not require that. Nix comes and says, and this is why it's like both a little lower level and to the side of what we're used to, because everything you pull from Nix, you're going to be pulling with all it needs to be created, built, and run. And I think that's one of the core concepts that allow a lot of upstream benefits, like those things that I mentioned about reproducibility and determinism from Nix.
Yeah, makes sense. So I guess how do you see? I know one of the use cases for Flox that has been sort of shining and growing is in the context of AI and kind of AI environments and agents. Can you tell us a few examples of how you see Flox and kind of these environment definitions come into play in the world of AI?
Yeah, so very, very early on last year.
It's like 50% of ChatGPT's lifespan or something like that.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So very early on last year, one of the big waves, because when we started Flox about 4 years ago, and Flox has a history coming out of one of the largest quant funds. So there's like a big scientific, I guess history to Flox with my co-founder, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
But we weren't planning for AI when we were building it, right? It was just that Flox came in and said, hey, why can't this entire 4 first layers of software infrastructure be mushed into just one command, where developers back then, right, humans, just don't need to think about it, right? I think it's like the spec-centric aspect of what you guys sometimes talk about. Fast forward to last year when AI starts picking up, and all of a sudden we see this wave come in of actually the folks utilizing and building, like the AI engineers that need to access their systems,
mm-hmm.
right? They need to accelerate the GPUs all of a sudden. They need to really work and stay in tune with things. And that's where we did feel a big wave come in, because Flox can sit on anything. So Flox can sit locally, it can sit in the cloud, it can sit in a container. But the local aspect was the most important, because that meant that these engineers could actually touch and be aware of the system around them. Their environments were aware of everything going on. So they were aware of the GPUs, they were aware of the hardware on the machine. And that created the first wave. So that was the first initial use case. Then on the AI front, I think the most active areas are definitely on folks creating environments for agents today. Because just like a human, Flox kind of abstracts away the need to think about the infrastructure. We do the same thing for also non-humans. And the thing about non-humans is that we're really trying to make it a bit more, again, reproducible on the output front. So we've seen a lot of folks use that as a baseline.
Right. And I think, so still on the first point on sort of being aware of the infrastructure, can you kind of explain that a little bit more? So I guess what does this awareness manifest as? I understand the needs to reproduce what is sort of an elaborate production environment in your sort of local dev environment. I guess that's part of the advantage of these reproducible environments, I guess, like in the name on it. But what do you mean by hardware aware?
So pretty much the way you should think about it is Flox and containers, they work together. And if we want to, we can dive into that. But one of the main differentiations between Flox and anything that like a container or a VM or a micro VM is that Flox is able to run fully locally with your system. So while it creates the isolation via file path mechanism, Flox is with the system in the system. There's no abstraction. So you don't need to poke holes to tell it to grab my GPU or do something with that GPU. And I think that was a very native initial adoption motion coming in from AI ecosystems that were just like, we need to use these GPUs for a plethora of reasons, in the initial friend running wave of AI.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that really helps. So I think a useful, maybe like an alternative that has not sort of provided what was necessary was to say, okay, I want to create these shareable environments for my AI engineers, but then if I create a VM or if I create a container, those are too far abstracted from the hardware. And then Flox kind of solves that problem and gives them the sort of the ease of portability while sort of actually running on their machine so they can take advantage of it, which in the world of anybody kind of building models or training models or sort of, frankly, probably even inference, you need that proximity. And I think kind of a useful mental model for probably more people are familiar with containers than with sort of Flox or those local environments.
Or Nix, exactly. 100%.
Yeah.
And the one more recent, right, this like 6 to 9 month, which is again part of the AI wave, is just that there's a little shift, and I guess there's two groups thinking about local AI and cloud AI. And again, because of those core principles inside of Flox and Nix, there's also a huge wave of adoption of folks who are kind of like local AI first, where you can spin up your models locally, you can run all of that, and that's also another piece to it.
I think so. So I guess that's sort of another interesting use case to sort of understand in AI. So this, if the first one was really like applicable to people that are maybe closer to the science side of it, right? You want to run on it. As you get into inference and you talk about sort of using AI, I think what we definitely find, we see this in our landscape, and we see this just sort of in conversations with kind of Tessl beta users and such, is how. And I was about to say the word disloyal, sort of people are to their tools. Like people are very much in experimentation mode.
Yep.
They want to move around and they kind of load up their machines with all sorts of things to try them out. They would use multiple IDEs, which, was a heresy moments ago, right? They're probably more loyal to VS Code than they are to Cursor or Windsurf or Copilot. And so as they build around, I guess the sort of tactical advantage is just this ability to try out a thing quickly without kind of messing up your system while being able to run something like a local LLM in your setup. So I guess I don't know if there's a question sort of in there, but I just find it interesting, which is it's kind of an era of experimentation, for many developers.
Right, and that's definitely another core benefit that we're bringing in for that amazing open source Nix, right? It's that the isolation happens via the local file system. So you can spin up and spin down these environments that have local LLMs or local, have everything you need. And anytime you do that, there is 100% certainty of zero conflict on the system itself. So you can have Cursor running next to, Windsurf running next to, 5 different models. All of them might be requiring different versions of 100 different dependencies, and Flox would be able to actually self-sustain each of them, spin them up, spin them down, and you, the agent, the human, don't even have to care about it.
Okay, cool. And it's kind of a good time to remind that Flox is really sort of an open source, open kind of core, actually more than open core, really, like properly open source solution. And so I think we're sort of, describing and kind of digging into it, but I think that gives the opportunity for everybody listening to try it out, but also for kind of the sort of broader adoption as people experiment once again with sort of with these tools.
Yeah, and by the way, on that point, everything I've mentioned up until now is open source and free. So I haven't even touched anything that's not.
Yeah, there's probably a whole business around it. No, that is its own merit of it, but it was important to sort of know this is kind of readily available to you. Cool. So maybe let's sort of expand a little bit out of Flox is a means of enabling some sort of I guess kind of environment as code in an easy fashion to define it. I guess we talked about more tactical, AI engineers being able to work or sort of experimentations. Maybe let's dig a little bit more into this agent use case that you brought up. I guess what is the value proposition or the sort of the problem to be solved that you're seeing people kind of use environments as code, specifically Flox, for agents?
So obviously, opinionated take, right? This could change probably 50 times between now and 2 weeks from now when DeepSeek 5 comes out. Yeah. I think that the core concepts of Nix and Flox when we were building it still stay the same, right? Because at the end of the day, something is writing code, something is deploying that code, someone is using that code. And here's my opinionated take. My opinionated take here is that the more progress we can make on making the output from humans or agents, or humans and agents, or whatever mix we have in between, to be deterministic, right? To be more trusted, the more ROI we're going to get out of AI. Because I think about it as like human assist and human replace. Now, not replace me in the evil kind of way, like we don't need engineers, but just more in the way that that is actually giving me, an engineer, or me, Ron, value, right? Over necessarily building another new feature on top of AI. And when I think about it this way, today what Flox does and what Flox represents for me for the agentic world is that bottom three steps of infrastructure, right? If we can go and tell you that you're just going to tell us what you need, Flox is going to create that for you. And it's going to have full reproducibility, going to have full isolation, no conflict, and it's going to output the same thing every time you give it the same input, right? We just maybe took a 10-step stack and told you that the first three steps are solid. So I think that's one of the big use cases for agentic systems where they come in, they use Flox for those reasons. That's one. The second piece is that with Flox, it allows, again, just like humans, for the agents to run, test, deploy the software on whatever the latest and greatest is, whatever they want to. They want to run it on some Linux variant at 8 a.m. and at 10 p.m. there was a recommendation that shifted some of the model to go and test it locally or in some like 10 different case variants for a hardware and software mix. The Flox environment will stay consistent. Neither the agent nor anyone else needs to change it. And the last thing I'll say on this, on that general kind of thread, again, on the opinionation side, is I think the highest paid engineers are going to start to be the test engineers, the QA. I don't even know how we call that yet. I don't think we yet have a name for it, but it's the engineers that take millions of lines of code and somehow, as humans, validate it, right? There's going to be like a validation phase at the end. And imagine that whatever that code is, as long as the Flox environment was the baseline for it, anything else can take it, slap it onto something, and run it. So I think there's going to be a huge portion of portability that comes into it that Flox provides today for agents.
Yeah, I think so. It's a very good point. I feel like each of them kind of needs a bit of a breakdown. And I think like the meta point that I'm getting, I think from what you're describing, which is an analogy that I like, is that AI and agents, that what they do is they supercharge patterns that we've already sort of seen in the real world. And so maybe before you could rely on people kind of sort of keeping their environments in sync and being able to represent what happened in production and create something that is similar to what they created previously in the test environment. And as you supercharge it and you turn it from something that happens once a day to something that happens once a minute, then any percentage deviation from accuracy over here starts multiplying and becoming unusable.
Exactly. And like the simple way, and I don't know, obviously don't want to call out different products I've been testing around. I test different products all the time. And I just built another app a few days ago just to test the waters and where things are. And it's freaking amazing, right? As long as it's simple, you kind of define the app, you define it as a spec, or define it with English instead of with code. It goes and builds it, hooked up, the database product, hooked up all of that for me. I only needed to do the authentication and the connections. But then I thought about it, I was like, okay, this is super basic. I want to now take it away and now build on top of it. That transition going from agent to human wasn't as easy as I would have wanted it to be. And I think that's also going to be a big part of it. And we've seen it before, right? We've seen it before with all the other waves. We've seen it from cloud to local, or just from one engineering team to another engineering team.
Exactly. Distributed engineering teams are sort of the same. So it's a multiplier, but it may happen more and might happen like agent to agent as well, like two different agents doing it. So I think like in the three bullets you kind of mentioned before, so the notion of trust really is to say, hey, there's a whole bucket of problems that might occur because you set up the environment incorrectly. So maybe in an alternate universe, or like another alternative that you have, is to have the agent make up an environment, create a bunch of commands that it's going to run and create that setup based on some sort of instruction or things like that. If it's doing it every time, it's not going to do it the same every time. And so can you just sort of make that deterministic? So, right, I think that makes sense. That's sort of a bullet or like a bucket of items that are useful, and that increases trust because it reduces variability. We'll talk later about generating environment. That's probably its own kind of creature, but at least for now, right? So that's sort of a trust building exercise. And then subsequently, when there's the portability piece or reproducibility of like, okay, can you you kind of hand it back over to me and try to avoid the works on my machine type environment and move it over. So I guess that's kind of bucket 2, or maybe I'm kind of mixing in your bucket 2 and bucket 3, and which you also mentioned, like consistency or sort of consistent delivery. So I probably blended a little bit your sort of 3 bullets, but it is about controlling the variability in a world that is naturally sort of statistics to at least not multiply the other variables, and then being able to do handoff, whether it is between agents or it is between agent and human, in a clean way.
Exactly. And I think if we're looking at an opinionated 5-year vision for some of the AI native areas, I'm like, just like code switches hands, human hands, right? Developers move companies, they move teams. This year, to your point about, the point you made earlier that folks are kind of like jumping around between different editors, I can totally imagine us one year using one agentic platform, and then the next year, the latest and greatest, the smartest agentic platform is a different one. Maybe because I'm paying more of a premium or whatever the new ecosystem is, but I want that agentic system to be able to tap into my code, just like I want, the other senior engineer swapping into team to be able to tap into the code immediately. And I think that's going to be a big part of being, at least that's how I see AI native in the future, right? Can you actually be AI native in that world?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. But I feel like to me that opens up a slightly different question, which is, okay, what we talked about up until now is just about reproducible environments, right? And then there are multiple ways to achieve reproducible environments. One, I think that you were referring to that's easy to disqualify is a specific platform offers you its own reproducible environments. Heck, it may be using Flox behind the scenes, but if it doesn't show that, then for all intents and purposes, you can't move from one agentic framework to another if you've defined your environments within that, with no sort of standards. And so I think that one's like easy. I don't know if there's a ton to say. Is like we would benefit from standards. The world of open source is it's kind of there for a reason. I think the second one is more interesting, which is probably by default. If I was to approach this, and I'm just sort of less up to speed on the latest, I might default to containers, and I'd say, well, containers are my shared environment. That's how I define my kind of infrastructure, my kind of production environments on it. So I guess how do you think about pros and cons or sort of differences between using these like a declarative, if you will, kind of Flox definitions versus, I don't know if I'm presenting it correctly, and a built container?
So I think the way we look at it today is that, first of all, why not both, right? I think containers, again, opinionation, and I know for many people containers are a lot of things. I think container inherently came in and solved the world's problem about pretty much the entire transportation layer, right? The entire orchestration layer. I think that's like where containers are amazing, right? You have an Amazon facility, everything goes into boxes, and then those boxes, guess what, are really easy to ship around because they're square. They fit in things that are square. We humans like square-shaped things. So I think where there's a heavier differentiation is on how do you define that container and what can move under you that removes the reproducibility and removes the determinism. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how well defined your container is. And I think that best practices around containers are usually not that well, not that well. But even if you do define that container as well as you can, you still have layers on the operating system that can move from underneath you. And that just makes it not 100, even nothing is 100% reproducible, but it makes it significantly less reproducible to an extent that then kind of, again, my opinionation is doesn't matter when you have such a hyperscaled world with everything building code and building 10x, 20x, 100x code and deploying it. So in my mind, it's like, it's pretty much free to go and define that container with Flox and now be able to make sure that you have that full reproducibility and then run the container and do your flows. But two things. Once you've set up that environment, that concept with Flox, two things now happen. One, whenever you want to move off containers, whenever you don't want to necessarily use them for development environments, I'm not talking about orchestration. I think that orchestration is where containers stay really strong. But I'm talking about the dev environment, the builds, that whole ecosystem. Whenever you want to move off it, you have a common baseline to move off it. You can move back to local. You can move to the latest and greatest thing. You can use agents that prefer containers and agents that don't. You become agnostic to it. And I think that's very powerful. The second piece is exactly that, where you have that spec-centric definition, right, at the base layer that scales throughout time with you. you always have that in your, in your back pocket should you want to pull it out. So in my mind, and we have obviously we have a large doc on this whole thing. It's like today, Flox and containers go hand in hand. And if you want to continue the container flow, great. You just added another value point for yourself almost for free.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think part of it is like AI is the great multiplier, and including multiplying of probabilities. And I guess containers, it's not that hard, right? You need to have worked a little bit, especially if you're sort of pulling from latest as your sort of base image that you build today, you build next week. You're very unlikely to get the same environment, and so part of it is just it doesn't take far to sort of it doesn't take long to get into that state.
Right, and some of just the additional use cases there is that we said about it earlier. It's like if you need to take a container into development and you need to start poking holes at it, then what's the point of putting things in a box? Right. Use Flox for the local things that you need to be able to run, the things that need to be able to be system aware, and those more complex areas, and then chuck it into a container when you want to go ship it out.
Yeah.
Can you ship it out with Flox? 100 Flox and Nix, 100%.
Yeah.
But that's not something that you have to do today. It's things that integrate fully.
Yeah, and I like I do think, I don't know if there is a correct way to do spec centric. I mean, I think it's an intentionally kind of broad, but I think it does rhyme well with declarative and the idea of saying that containers are an implementation of your environment, and so once again, you don't really have like what it is that you wanted to do in there. You don't really have something that is a more higher level abstraction of what it is that you're trying to achieve. And so if you go higher level, you have something that is inherently more portable and more adaptable to different. So we do talk about spec-centric development being a means of creating software that is adaptable because it takes in the relevant context and then generates the implementation that is right for it. And maybe today, in a good percentage of the cases, it'll be context. But frankly, even earlier in this conversation, you pointed out, for instance, proximity to hardware. So it might also be that you want a tool that has access to sort of direct GPU access, and maybe containers offer you that. Maybe they do not. But you have a choice of doing it. I'll throw in one more interesting thing, which is I do feel the pace that AI kind of multiplies, part of it is indeed the frequency of actions. How often is code deployed or written or tested or runs? But then with that also comes just the pace in which these actions actually take place, and therefore the overhead that use of tools happens. And so at Tessl, for instance, where we generate code in many ways and kind of abuse it in many ways on it, and we try to have some version control that tracks all these different changes. And we define that Git is a slowdown factor, and it's sort of not optimized for that type of use case. And at least in a good subset of cases, we feel like we needed. The team has literally written a service called not Git to clarify that it is not Git, but it does kind of feel a little bit like Git, but it is fast and it's local. It's nowhere near as sort of fully featured as Git, but it allows for many more cycles, or other capabilities. So I guess the other thought is, depending on what it is that you want your agents to do, in certain cases, maybe the ramp up and down of containers, maybe the speed of execution without it plays a role. That's probably, we're getting a little bit into edge cases versus the norm, but still probably an advantage.
No, I think I fully agree with you, because I'm sure that cloud native had a lot of meanings to a lot of different people, and I think it still has a lot of meaning to a lot of different people. We were just asked on a procurement form, "Are you cloud native?" And I was like, "Oh shit!" AI native. One of the things that it means to me now, and the difference between it and other of these native terms is, to your point, the speed of change, the speed of iteration, right? So to me, obviously, as a biased person, having more solid ground to stand on rather than shaky sand is always a net benefit. So if that bottom rungs of your infra are a bit more solid, that speed of iteration, you're going to be more resilient to it. And I think that's another compartment of AI native, because things are moving so fast all the time. It's not just about moving to a cloud provider or being able to operate in cloud ecosystems. I think AI native takes it to a whole other galaxy.
Yeah. So I think we've sort of spent a decent amount of time here talking about sort of environments and how, like, I guess we first of all, we kind of skipped over a little bit the fact that agents, to begin with, they need environments because they need the code that they generate to kind of face reality, right? They need to run it or get some form of like execution-based feedback. And so we kind of skipped over that stuff. But I think that's a core part of that generation. Is that correct? Like, is that indeed the type of kind of agent environment you're seeing most commonly? Is I created some code and I need a place to run it on to see if it actually works?
Yep. So I think it's definitely in the testing, the validation, the build areas. And one of the things that I think is the most beautiful, and we didn't talk about Nix that deeply, but Nix, again, 20 years ago, one of the things it did is that it redefined the SDLC, because it said, we don't start with the developer environment and the development. If we start with the build and define it, we actually get everything else for free. So coincidentally, I see that aligning very well with agents, where it's like the first time an agent really cares about this ecosystem is when it's trying to build that code, right? Test it, check for exceptions, check for bugs, whatever it is. And that's why I'm starting to see Nix and Flox really align with this way of thinking. And I think that's why I've also been seeing, just giant growth over the last year or two that keeps exponentially going bigger.
Yeah. And that makes sense. It needs to be lean. It needs to be kind of fast to execute. It needs to be portable. And I guess what the other thing we didn't talk too much about, but I think is core, is this notion of reproducibility between the output of tools. So maybe let's talk about that a little bit. So you can sort of think of three domains in which environment management or kind of environments as code manifest in the context of AI. There's probably more like four, but at least, one is runtime. We sort of just spent a lot of time on it. I was like, I need a place to run my code on. The second is the idea of generating an environment. And just to say, the third is about like picking an environment or tool use of it, and maybe even learning over time. So we'll get to that one. But maybe let's talk a little bit about this second one, which is you have some tools, maybe all the vibe coding tools and those, they try to give you an output that would run somewhere. And so they need to generate an environment for you. Has that been a use case that you've sort of seen come up? And also, like, conceptually, is it a type of use case that you think of as an important one?
So we're very much seeing it come up. I think we're seeing it come up as a newer aspect. Again, everything is new, right? 1 year is
new. Is like 3 months versus 6, yeah.
Yeah, in the last 1 to 2 months, because I think a lot of these vibe coding products, and again, I'm making an assumption because this is coming off of like my weekend and while I'm watching Bosch Legacy on, whatever, building out apps. I think a lot of the vibe coding products are really trying to maximize their time to market. And they're not yet thinking about, okay, how do we hand this off? How do we build sustainable code? How do we actually build like high impact, long-term apps and products? They're thinking about, how do I release? I love this from a dinner we did earlier this week. Dana there was telling us about building this bingo app while in line at a concert, right? Because all her friends wanted to just have some fun. And that's exactly what vibe coding is for. They even optimize to try and have you self-deploy on one of their, deployments. If it's like, their website or whatever it is, they try to minimize the amount of human interaction that you have to do after that. And I think that saves a lot of that long-term thinking. Like, what environment do I need to set up? Is someone going to work on this 6 months from now? I think it's like these minute apps that they're optimizing for today. But in the last few months, I think a lot of these vibe coding products have started to be, okay, how do we monetize more? How do we create more of a sticky customer base, and thinking about it? And that's been another inbound conversation we've been having. So much so that it's made us think also a lot about, what does it mean to be this bottom rung of infrastructure for an AI native world with all of this data about what are the best packages and dependencies to use, what are the fastest, what are the most secure. And that's kind of giving us a look at what the future of like AI environment creation would be like. So that's a quick, well, not so quick thought from my end on that.
So I think it makes sense. I like the analysis. I definitely like the minute app. I haven't actually heard that term. I heard like disposable apps and all that. Minute apps is an interesting one.
I think about food all the time, and for some reason it makes me think of a minute steak. It's like, would you serve this? Probably not.
yeah. But it's if you're home and you're hungry, and this is what you've got to eat. So yeah, I like the term, and I agree. I think maybe even legitimately, a lot of the vibe coding platforms, especially, are just trying to kind of get you to something working at the end. And so I guess that's both a pro and a con. So in the immediate term, they also benefit from prepackaged environments because they can pull one off the shelves and they run them. Although maybe they don't care about variety too much. Like many of them are very, I'm going to pick a specific, super base and whatever sort of setup that I have. And so they might have like really hardened or like picked a very specific environment to run on. But then as they think about reproducibility, they think about something that is long-term. I guess the other aspect of that is portability, right? You can imagine, especially leaning into like the open source ones, like All Hands or things like that, maybe generating a more portable environment format so that you can run it on whatever infrastructure that you want. While maybe the more SaaS environments might bias in saying like, look, I'm going to handle it end to end for you. And I think that's significant. It's back to that sort of standards benefits of, allow me to pull it up and continuing it, but it also allows for chains of tools, right? It means you don't need necessarily this one tool to now be both the best at generating, say, a piece of code and deploying it, and another one, and also know all the way to like being the best at operating it. You can say, well, there's another tool here, and they share the same language about the thing that got deployed, and they can continue on from there.
Yeah, and I think that's another strong opinionation for where we're going in 5 years. I think, again, could there be an AI Skynet that does it all and also gives us a curfew at 8 p.m.? Hopefully not. But I think at the end of the day, there's going to be products and companies and agents that specialize in their areas. And therefore, that ecosystem is going to be rebuilt, right? You have the AI kind of like stack that you guys have been creating. And I think we're going to slowly start seeing that, condense into what is the AI native stack? What do you use for each part of your flow? And maybe the infra map and the SDLC will look totally different. Maybe it won't be, code, build, deploy. Maybe it'd focus a lot about testing. At the end of the day, I think you're 100% right. We're going to have different products, different agents that specialize in different pieces of it, and they're going to need to interop, right? Maybe not as much as like 12 different teams across a large company needing to build out a product. Maybe it's just 3, but you're always going to have, I think you're always going to have that transition, because I don't think one agent and one company is going to just be able to say that they do everything the best. I think you're going to have a whole ecosystem built around it.
Yeah, I do think a lot about sort of the right scope of tools in the world of AI dev, and there is. I think I said this in a while ago on an episode where you can think that there are sort of 2 trajectories. One is there's a big brain platform that it just needs to know it all. It is the sort of the super intelligent Skynet sort of environment, and therefore, because it's so good at that, we're basically just dependent on it doing everything. And if it doesn't, we're just kind of stuck. Or maybe we know how to like become power users of that platform to be able to do it. I think that's a slightly sad reality, because really it limits innovation. It means that someone with a great new idea of a piece in the puzzle can't kick in. And there's another reality in which we do have a chain of tools, and we allow different components to come in and blend. And we had Matt Billman on the show from Netlify, the CEO and co-founder of Netlify, and he has some great insights. But he's also very passionate about the web manifesto and about the whole kind of open ecosystem, and talked about how it's also tempting to lean into the kind of closed garden, where, because for the same reason we've been mentioning a lot, this stochasticity, the sort of the non-determinism that is also bothersome in the world of AI. And one way to do that is like, hey, just be in a closed environment, fewer kind of variables, and it's very tempting and sometimes faster to get to something working. But really, I think what we want as a development ecosystem is we want an open system. We want a system that you can hand off things, and you can have a tool that is best of breed at a phase of the journey. And I like the concept of open environment definitions, because environments are like an overlooked piece oftentimes of software. Like they're critical. Platform and ops people are well aware of their importance on it, but I think for many developers, they're just, they don't think about them that much. So I do really like the idea of leaning into and maybe investing in these different agents at outputs that are portable and open, so standards based.
And obviously, you're talking to one of the more biased people coming in from.
Yeah, I feel like I'm sort of saying this, and you're not going to disagree. You're clearly.
As you're saying this, I'm like, if not just for the fact that every AI agent, again, highly opinionated person, is going to be every AI agent, every AI specialization, whether your company is building the best agent for testing or the best agent for development of high throughput, I don't know, biotech, protein synthesizing, whatever, there's going to be an open source equivalent. Leave alone, even if you have the AI Skynet, you're going to have open source AI Skynet, which sounds even, I don't know if that's scarier or less scarier than, I guess, depending on who owns the closed source one. But I guess my point is, to your point, I think that's what you kind of like just catalyzed in me. I was like, even if we don't have different companies in the stack, you're going to have the open source and the non-open source, best of class already. And being able to traverse across that is just going to allow us, mere humans, to be able to go further.
Yeah, I fully agree. So anyways, we got, I think we're sort of very much on the bandwagon, so we talked about runtime and how do you define things that the agents can make the agents better. Then we talked a little bit about output and how you can create runnable applications, including their environments on it, that are hopefully in this sort of open standard panacea that we want, Flox being a contender for that. And then I guess the third part is around environments as a tool, or something that we know how to use. So like, I think as a human developer, you get better over time knowing which tools to use, including like some SaaS apps, some containers are going to run that have stuff on top of them. I guess, how do you think about, I don't know if the word empowering is correct, right? Like powering agents with environments as a means of, better agentic decision-making or capabilities?
So we're obviously spending a lot of time thinking about how do we solidify, that first step of infrastructure right above your OS, and with that time, we're also able to see and put together a lot of data on what it means to build best-in-class environments and how to build them, and what runs faster, what runs more reproducibly, what's more deterministic. We're starting to see all of that. And I think the next step up is that, eventually you would just tell the human or the agent, or the human telling the agent, will just tell us or show us what they're trying to do. You're not going to need to say you need Python 3.12 or you need this version of, some database or whatever it is. You just tell us what you're trying to do, just like you just told the agent. The agent might then translate it to us at the infra level, and we'll just output what that agent needs in order to be having that consistent kind of the software fabric of environments at its baseline. I think that's where it's going in terms of environment creation. That's where we'll be a few years from now, where just as much as we're trying to make you just, tell the computer in English or in whatever language what you want it to do, the agent or the human is going to be able to do the same thing, but just for the entire infrastructure below it. And I think that's where we're going with environment creation, where it's like, I want to, let's say the last thing I just built was like, I wanted to build a voting app for my family that's dynamic and everyone can see everyone else's vote for something. That agent would be translating it, right? And then saying, hey, I'm building this piece of code. We'll look at either that piece of code or the words in English and automatically know what to pull in for that agent to utilize. And it can be bi-sided, meaning that agents can come and say, this is what I'm trying to build. Flox will just auto-generate it for them. Or it can actually, if there's agents trying to optimize for it, Flox can actually suggest what's the ideal environment, and then the agent will actually build off of that based on the user requirements and the user spec. So there's kind of like a dual-sided thing that we're thinking about here, and I think that's where we're going to be a few years from now, completely. And it's going to be fully optimized.
I think it's really interesting because it blends into again the thought of like creating an app and understanding that you have actually a variety of applications. I think today we're not seeing as much. I think if you're building with AI and you're sort of doing vibe coding and all that, you don't encounter that problem immediately, probably because whoever it is that is building the platforms probably, they created a very finite, very kind of a carefully selected set of environments. and they just deploy in that environment. Like, so we have the open web. You might have deployed specific on Netlify. You might have deployed it on within it's like a React application. Like so it's a very specific, and then they only generate to that confine. So I think like the problem, it makes sense to me very much in like a future tense, but I think it's like a pain that people are not yet feeling today because they're still working within narrow confines of what can be generated, right?
Exactly. And I think this is exactly like, look at our careers as software engineers, right? It's so specialized, it's so niche. You come with the experience, and there's a reason where job descriptions today require 5-10 years of a specific language experience, because you come knowing which packages are the best, but you come with that kind of like world view of it. And I think we're going to move to a situation where we're going to be able to 5x, 10x, if not 100x this space just by defining, the best requirements and defining the best, like these apps are able to create these minute apps, but in the future, they're going to be able to create 100-minute apps and 10-year apps and hopefully 100-year apps. So I totally resonate with how you're looking at it, right? So
yeah. I think it's interesting to think maybe of environment as a bit of, partly overlooked because of speed part of the AI generation. So for my kind of different maybe lens engaging with people building with AI, I think today probably the top of mind for people when they think about environment is environments as an enabler for their agents. So what they want is to create the code. Like, create the code for me. Now, to create the code, they need an environment to be able to run things inside of it, and maybe run some tools, run some tests. And so that's like focus and passion on it. Maybe they don't think as much about the output piece because they're in a closed garden, they're just generating that. Maybe they don't think as much about the declarative piece because to begin with, it's so hard already to generate like specific code that it's actually something they anyway need to do, which is narrow the fold and just like focus the LLM on creating something. And then on top of all of those, the reality is today that there are many gaps between the way vibe coding and other sort of AI generation operates today and any long-term viability of these applications. Like, there's no thinking about maintenance of those applications. So and in that process, there's no thinking about what happens when something in your environment needs an update. Like, I don't know. It's like 7 steps down the road from, not to say 70, of the problems that are top of mind for me today. And at the same time, they feel kind of fundamental when you think about how would you build things in software that has longevity. Is that correct? I guess kind of representation, like if you were to guess at, I don't know if you have actual telemetry probably for this granularity of division, but like when you think about people building environments, would you say most of them are in that, like, I need environments for my agents to be able to test code that they've created, versus I want portable environment, versus I want declarative, like a spec-based kind of a prompt-driven environments?
I think when we're looking at agents today, they're optimizing for that minute app. They're optimizing for as simple as possible, low cost as possible. A user asks for something pretty basic. We spit it out with a minimal amount of bugs. And that optimization, I think obviously I'm overstepping into the folks building agents, so excuse me. But I think from a user perspective and from like a, let's say, pseudo partner vendor perspective as a person, providing Flox and Nix, I think that optimization makes them care very much about being able to spin up the environment, test it so that it's, that minute app is fully cooked, and then ship it out, right? They're kind of using that environment as just like a transactional piece throughout just putting the stuff out there. Now what I'm seeing in the last few months is a lot of them are thinking about how commoditized those minute apps are starting to become, right? There are so many different products out there that you tell it, hey, I want a voting app that my family can see each other live, blah, blah, blah. I hook up Superbase, which is amazing, and all of that. And now I think more and more of them are thinking about, wait a second, where is the money? Where is the ROI? The ROI is not in these minute apps.
And where's the differentiation as well? Like,
exactly.
Like they all...
And I think that's where they're starting to come in and say, oh boy, we need some baseline. We need our users to be able to export this and start working on it super easily, just as if they were sitting on the same team with this agent. And that's what I was talking about earlier, where we're moving from like human assist to human niceties to actual human replace in things that allow me to focus on the bigger, more innovative tasks at hand, because all of a sudden this agent becomes a team member instead of just being that intern that we asked to throw together the lunch ordering app for the office that we're going to throw away 3 weeks from now because we'll forget about it.
Right. Yeah. And I think in that sense, that becomes, you have to think indeed long term, just like you wouldn't continue hiring, a junior developer who only built applications that were suitable for sort of a 3-day lifespan or a 3-month lifespan.
And again, there's use cases for it, but I think it's, to your point, the differentiation, the target market and the market caps are going to be very different for the minute apps and the folks who are able to extend that into the large ecosystems.
Yeah, and it's like I don't think either of us kind of mean to diss the application today. They allow us to tap into the magic. They're amazing. They do feel magical, and they're an iteration. Like, I think you can never jump to the end. You always have to build it. But it's interesting to also think about what are the gaps between that and the future there. I think I have one more question on environments, and I do want to ask a little bit about that dinner that you mentioned in passing, because I know that you had some great insights from it. Just one more question on environment. MCP is all the rage these days on it. I know you have Flox Hub, and it sort of holds a whole bunch of environments that people have there that, from my kind of layman's perspective, it feels, oh, cool, that's a thing to sort of slap an MCP front end on top of. Just curious, like, have you thought of that? I guess what's your view there?
I guess when I was going to say something, I was like, well, shouldn't that be obvious? My head of marketing, Ross, very creative genius. He usually says these has these sayings that just stick with me. And when we started looking into MCP, because Flox has obviously been looking into MCP, he told me, like, MCP, and I love this, is like giving a super sharp machete to a random number generator. It's like giving Hal 9,000 arms and legs. So I think from the MCP front, at the end of the day, I think it's just a more capable version of what we're doing, right? All of a sudden, this AI has arms and legs. This agent can actually go out there and I don't know, right, in the real world, potentially hook up to my email, answer my banker for me, review the tip amount that I wasn't scammed out of, I don't know, right? Can access my bank. And the way that we think about it is that MCPs will run software. That software has to be provided upfront and reliably just as much as anything else. Or it has to be dynamically available for agents to extend upon. And from our perspective, that sense of reliability just steps up again a level, right? Because if I'm going to sell you an agent that is connected to a bunch of real world outside services, if we don't have that AI trust and AI reliability in it, that's just a more dangerous, random number generator with a machete that you're launching out into the world with your name on it. So that's obviously a whimsical point of view from the Flox side.
Yeah. It's interesting. I get it. I think you're sort of consistent also in pointing out that the one of the key challenges is just the degrees of freedom and just like how many things can change. And yeah, MCP is like an API with no structure, that may or may not work. And I think today, by the way, it does shine in places in which it is still an attended process that runs, because then you give it tools. But then if you did blunder, right, and cut off a leg, you at least notice it before you say yes. And so that's good. But it does feel like also a good way. I think people talk a lot about MCP as a tool call primarily. And I actually really like the resources aspect of MCP. And it feels like the opportunity to make the different LLMs that run aware and kind of easily access, hopefully frequently successfully, some environment from Flox that you can kind of pull down. It's probably interesting and kind of goes towards that sort of declarative aspect.
And again, we've been having immense fun with it. Like, we've been hooking it up to different things and bringing it together, and we're experimenting with a few things with a few partners, and it's MCP is great in my mind.
Yeah. Its degrees of freedom are precisely what kind of leaves room for creativity, and so I think you see a lot of people just trying it out. I would wager that it would become a lot more strict. Or at least have an option to become a lot more strict over the coming year. So, hey, just before we wrap up here, I know you recently hosted a dinner event with some of the top tech leaders from, I don't know if I want to name names, but like some of the top AI companies, both building on AI and building the foundations for AI on it. So we're veering a little bit outside maybe of the kind of a Flox or environment lens, but curious, what takeaways, what are the most interesting topics you felt came up during that conversation?
I think one was that, AI's impact on developer productivity still a very hard area of, to quantify and to make decisions based on. I don't think anyone's surprised by that. I think even pre-AI, we had a hard time quantifying developer productivity, and actually, there was like inner loop, outer loop, lines of code, which was complete bullshit. So I think that also made me feel better, because I was like, thinking about that you're always thinking about it. It's like, are they all like using AI and seeing these huge quantifiable movements and they're strategic about it? I think in general, it's like a lot of folks are still working against that.
And that's interesting. And by the way, another example of the multiplier, or like AI is the great multiplier, that it's something we always wanted, develop productivity measurements, and maybe, do we have now enough motivation to track that? And I wonder when we'll start talking about agent productivity.
So I've actually seen a few start talking about that. Won't disclose that too much, but that was one. I think I'll just call out the top three that came to my mind now. The second was definitely that glass ceiling that we kind of dripped throughout, where how do we focus on generating more innovation on the AI trust side rather than more innovation necessarily on having AI do something more or something better? And again, food connotations all the way. This was a dinner. One of the things that was mentioned from my end was like, I want AI to be my ultimate sous chef, right? I don't want it to like make a meal and wait for me to finish what I'm doing and then make me check the meal. I don't need it to make intrinsic like Michelin star meals. I kind of want it to cut up bread very consistently and then go put it on the table, right? Now I can go focus on other things. And I think the issue that a lot of us are still feeling is that 3 out of 5, even 4 out of 5 with the best models and providers, they cut up the bread, they put it on the table. On that 5th attempt or the 4th attempt, they place some rocks on the table, they put some, like machine oil instead of olive oil. And that doesn't allow me to fully kind of step away from that area that AI is capable to do and move over to do things and spend more time in other places.
Can I ask just on that one before you go to the third? Is their sense or your sense that the part that needs to improve here is the AI becoming deterministic, or the humans changing how we work and to be able to deal with probabilistic?
So I think that's a great question, because that was the immediate follow up. I think one, we do want AI to become a little bit more repeatable. I want to know that when I ask it to cut bread and put it on the table, that like 95, again, also humans make mistakes, right? Yesterday I got my chicken with butter and I didn't want it with butter. And then they went out to the kitchen. There was no AI involved, I believe so, in Santana Row.
Yeah.
But we wanted a bit more. There's a threshold. We haven't defined it yet. It's probably more psychological than not.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other conversation was like, do we need to start just lowering our standards a bit? Because our standards are on humans who have 40 years, 30 years of experience doing most of these things at a minimum, right? And obviously they're older humans doing this. Do we just need to say that, you know what, when I'm writing an email response to confirm a time, I don't care if it's missing a period or it was superlative in its response because it's not human. Maybe we just need to give it a, run by Ron's AI. And and as a society, we'll be like, oh, it's not Ron saying, good sir, thank you so much, I'm so excited. Accepting your formal invite for the 1 p.m. meeting, we'll just be like, oh, that's fine, right? But it just saved time. So I think you're on the money that this thing has two aspects. It's like our shift of the psychological expectation and AI becoming more repeatable.
Yeah. And which I think is extra fascinating in the world of software development, in which we basically expect software to be deterministic. I guess we know if you're experienced that it's not, because environments, because data, but otherwise, like we have a pretty high bar of determinism that the AI systems are not currently meeting. And probably to a degree, we're going to have to accept that, but to a degree, they need to get that.
There was also an entire conversation that led from it about like, maybe these minute apps are just the new standard. Maybe, 50% of our thing become a disposable cup, right? That's like evil. We don't want to pollute the planet, but maybe we do start standardizing around some industries having disposable software where it's like every few months or every few weeks, you ship it out with all the new functionality and no one knows how to reproduce it because that's totally fine. And after a few months, you ship it out with all the new features on top of it. And that's like a standard question and a human psychology question.
Yeah.
The third one that stuck with me because I didn't expect it, but I once it was said, I was like, I have been thinking about this for a bit. It's like, it's career progression inside of startups, inside of tech companies, right? We're moving away from this. Obviously, in small companies, very different than like the mega corporates, but we're moving away from it. There's an obvious career path now. We need to kind of change our thinking there. And how do we motivate ourselves? How do we motivate our teams? How do we show them growth, right? It's moving away from, you'll do more, you'll hire more, you'll be a manager, and then you'll be a manager of managers, and then you'll step up. And that's like a direct correlation to scope and impact to what happens in an AI native world, right? Maybe we don't need middle management anymore. Maybe we're able to, have 59, 600 reports. I don't know. So how do you motivate the individual and how do you show them a path of growth when it's not so obvious anymore? And I think that was another big topic.
Yeah, that's a big and important question. I guess that, so brilliant insights, Ron. Thanks for all of the kind of the learnings, the sharing, the perspectives, both on environments as a service and probably conversation I should have left more time for on the takeaways from that dinner. Maybe just sort of one last question and teeing up a bit on this sort of last comment on career progression. I asked this a previous guest, and I find it interesting. If you had a child of 15 years old, would you want them to go study computer science in university right now? Or would you think that's a good career move for them?
I'm, again, very biased person. Hell yes. The reason for that is, other than being biased, I think the fundamentals don't change. They've never changed in any wave we've had for the past, 50 years of software. Fundamentals have always been there. Yes, they've grown, they've improved. But I think the main recommendation today I give and I really resonate with is T-shaped. Whatever industry you choose, and I'm going to pick on software engineering because that's the thing that you just asked me. Yes, go study software engineering, but make sure you go really deep. You go all the way to the fundamentals. I don't care if you chose Python because you like snakes or you chose C# for some weird reason. Go deep all the way to what are the fundamentals of software? Why is it doing it? How is it doing it? And then start going up, right? Because that will always exist. We're just adding another layer. We're just now moving from higher level languages to now English as a language to writing code. But someone or something is still touching the fundamentals, and understanding and knowing them is going to always be something that's needed. And no matter what the abstraction is, it's going to allow you to always be the most effective person using that abstraction. So obviously, yes on software engineering, and then regardless of software engineering, T-shaped kind of recommendation for it.
Cool. Well, thanks. Super insightful here. Ron, thanks again for coming on to share your learnings. And thanks everyone for tuning in. And I hope you join us for the next one.
Thank you, Guy. Awesome being here.